All right, folks, welcome again to the Team VTAC podcast or the Spun Up podcast, whatever you want to call it. We're videoing this, we're recording it, and hoping that we continue to get the great feedback that we've gotten. And by great feedback, I don't necessarily mean that you're saying good things. I'm saying that you're inspiring, or we're inspiring some of you all to get more involved and contact us and talk about what you think of some of these podcasts, some of these leadership techniques that we're talking about, some of the examples. And today, this entire podcast or leadership lesson is actually brought to you by one of the guys that reached out to us, a guy named Mike Bell. I hope Mike doesn't mind that I use his name here, but he sent us a letter, and I'm going to read that real quick so that you guys know where this all came from. He said, Dear sir, always enjoy your podcast, and they always provoke much thought or just a better day. You mentioned two things in the last podcast that I would love for you to go into at greater depth. First, leadership in defeat or setbacks. Most of the leadership stuff out there never addresses this area and prefers to focus only on unicorns and tiddlywink spirit. In this area, I always think of Washington at Valley Forge or his numerous retrograde movements during the Revolution. Also, Eisenhower carrying both victory and defeat speeches in his coat pocket for the Normandy landings. Secondly, you mentioned a leader needing individuals at the top and at the shoulders to encourage and support a leader. I would really be interested if you touched on the importance of encouragement for those at peer level, but also individuals within the organization. Thank you for your continued service to our country, and may God richly bless you. Mike Bell. Okay, Mike. Awesome. I really appreciate you reaching out to us. First of all, I want to read what Eisenhower's note said that he carried in his pocket. Now think about this. Eisenhower leading into Normandy, where he knows that we're gonna lose troops. I've had people say, well, we got to make sure that everybody goes home safely. If Eisenhower would have said that at Normandy, we would have never even hit the beaches there because people were going to die. And he knew that, and he took that responsibility. And here's what the note that he carried in his pocket said. It said, our landings in the Cherbourg Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. It is mine alone. I delegated authority, but not responsibility. This is amazing. One, he was a great leader, but two, to know that if something went south, he was going to step up there and be absolutely accountable for the actions that he had taken as a leader. He had made that decision, and he was going to stand by that decision. So I think that's just, I think it's awesome. So leadership during defeat, and really leadership during defeat, that's when we have to lead. That's when it really matters. When everything is going great, I'm not going to say who cares, because we got to care, but when we have issues, that's when we need to stand up and be that leader that's needed. One of the things I often talk about is, what is your word? What's the most important leadership trait to you? And I had a DEA fella come up to me, and he had drawn a picture of his word, and he'd written he drew a little drawing at the bottom, and it was a set of waves going across the page. And at the top, he wrote the word buoyant, saying that was his word. And if you read my Leadership in the Shadows book, you know what I'm talking about. But his point was, as a leader, we have got to be just like that float, or being buoyant like a buoy on top of those waves. So when times are good, we're the leader. When times are bad, we're still the leader. We go out, we do great things, we give the boot shampoo to somebody that we got to come back. Times go south because now we got to explain to our leaders why we gave the boot shampoo to somebody. So super important to be buoyant. I think that's awesome, staying on top of that wave. What a great word to choose. I thought it was kind of goofy when I first heard that. And then when he explained it, I said, well, that's the perfect leadership word. So just think about being positive and being at the top of your game, even when things are bad. So when we're in defeat, we need to need to step up. Times are rough. Step up and be that leader. In our country right now, it's something that we want these leaders to do. We want them to step up and be great leaders. And some are struggling with that. Some are not. Some are trying to do the right thing. So as we continue to talk about leadership during defeat, I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, I want to read something that Thomas Paine wrote, and he served as a soldier and war correspondent or journalist for the military during the Revolutionary War. So he was highly respected by those around him who were soldiers, because he was on their side, and they wanted that. They wanted somebody to try to put out information to the public that helped their cause, and he was one of the guys that did that. So he wrote a thing called The American Crisis, and I'm going to read what he said, what he wrote, and this was read to the troops on 23 December 1776. If you don't know what happened on 23 December 1776, well, we were preparing to cross the Delaware into Trenton and have one of the most influential battles for the outcome of the Revolutionary War, I believe. Not just that, but the Battle of Princeton and then Assunpink Creek and then Princeton, led by George Washington. So here's what he said. Like I said, imagine standing out there in the freezing weather, snow on the ground, listening to one of the officers read this to the men of the American Revolutionary Army. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Signed, Common Sense. So that was written by Thomas Paine. So what I like about that whole paragraph that I just read there is that it's absolutely true. We need to stand up, defend our country. We need to stand up and lead those people around us in times that are rough. And when we finish that, whether it's freedom we're fighting for or to have a better business, to be a good leader, to lead our family, whatever it might be, we're standing for that. And it's going to be rough, but is it not worth fighting for? Is our country not worth fighting for right now? Some people say, oh, it's over, we're done, it's crazy, we're never going to recover. I would absolutely disagree with you. If you've read history, which I absolutely love history, I would say that we've been in worse spots in our country. So keep your head up, stay positive, keep voting, keep getting out there and helping people, and let's try to get our country back on track and do the best things that we can possibly do. So how we act as a leader during the crisis like this. Now we've got George Washington getting ready to lead his people across this river, which, if you know about that, we did a podcast about this, and I forget what the number of that podcast was. I might have that in my notes here somewhere. But bottom line is we did a podcast. We talked about that with my son, and you can dig a little bit deeper into that if you want to find more about the Battle of Trenton there. But there's a lot of other things that happened during that time. You know, George Washington wasn't doing this for fame or fortune. He did it to lead warriors. He knew what was in sight at the end of this, and he wanted to start our country, but he wanted to save the American colonies from the tyranny that was being laid upon us. And it was a rough time. Just think about what was going on. By the way, I just saw in my notes here, episode 58, we called it Victory or Death. Go back and listen to episode 58, and I think you'll understand a little bit more what I'm talking about there. So I'm going to go through some notes here real quick. So 25 December 1776 was the crossing of the Delaware by American soldiers. 26 December, the Battle of Trenton, which was a victory over the Hessian troops led by Johann Rall, who was killed that morning in I guess in the streets of, well, I don't guess, I know, in the streets of Trenton. We had some other interesting things happen there. We had a man that would end up being president, Monroe. Monroe was able to get wounded and not leave his post until properly relieved, and then get treated. He ends up being president of our country, and I think that's pretty cool. We also had Alexander Hamilton there, also helping to run the artillery that was key in firing right down Main Street and taking Trenton that day. Okay, victory or death was the password that General Washington had picked for that mission, which I think is also pretty interesting. On the 2nd of January, so once they had fought, they crossed the Delaware again, went back and did some further planning. They decided they were going to go back and they were going to continue this fight. On 2 January, there was the Battle of Assunpink Creek, which was just outside of Trenton, New Jersey. Washington, he expected a strong counterattack after the Battle of Trenton. On 31 December, General Washington learned that 8,000 men with Cornwallis were moving towards Trenton. 8,000 men, a lot of dudes coming their way. Cornwallis led those troops to Trenton. He left about 1,400 troops with Lieutenant Colonel Charles Mahwood in, I think that's how you say that, Mahwood, Mahwood in Princeton. So Princeton also being a prime target for General Washington at this time. So other things that happened that were key to success. So on 1 January 1777, money arrived from the Continental Congress in Trenton to get Washington's army paid. So that was key to raise morale as well. Along with that money came resolves from the Continental Congress, which gave George Washington powers which quite honestly resemble those of a military dictator. But we were lucky because he didn't take that and run with it and become a dictator. He actually did the right thing, and as we see with what he did for our country over the next many years, because remember, this is the beginning of the Revolutionary War. It was to go on for many more years, and most of those times were bad. So once again, in defeat, George Washington continued to lead. So the Americans, they wanted to conduct a delaying action as Cornwallis's troops moved from Princeton towards Trenton. So they wanted to try to delay them and slow them down a little bit there. There was a guy named Matthias Alexis Rocher de Fermoy. Okay, I'm not able to speak French real well, so you guys will have to forgive me a little bit on that. He was going to lead this delaying action, but as with some Frenchmen, I guess, he was drunk at the time. So instead, he made his way to Trenton, and then Colonel Edward Hand stepped up and led this delaying action. So when things are going bad, leaders have to step up during that defeat and lead their people. So it was defeat because their commander's drunk. Subordinates said, "Roger that, I can do this, I can lead." So Colonel Edward Hand, he stepped up and he led those troops. So Hand and his troops, they fought that rolling delaying action, which it led the Brits to believe that they were fighting the entire American army at that time. And they weren't. They were just fighting a portion of them led by Colonel Hand. So he continued that rolling delay all the way to the bridge that crossed Assunpink Creek. And at that point, the Hessians, they had fixed bayonets and they were going to charge Hand's troops. And this is where George Washington, during all this chaos, think about that. George Washington, the highest ranking individual in the military, in the entire United States Army, is there in the middle of this operation, in the middle of what's about to be a defeat, because these cats are going to charge with bayonets fixed into the American army. But instead, George Washington steps up there and he told them to fall back. He said they would be covered by the American artillery, and they were. And there sat George Washington on his horse on the bridge that crossed that creek. So I'm going to read. This is from a book called Washington's Crossing, and I think I think this is This is pretty inspirational to me. So this is from a private named Private Howland, 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 Private Howland. And this is his front row view to what he saw that day. In the confusion, some Americans were left behind, and a few were caught by the oncoming British and Hessians. One of them was John Rosebrew, the elderly Scots Presbyterian chaplain from Northampton County, Pennsylvania. As the Americans fell back through the town, Rosebrew was sitting in Trenton's Blazing Star Tavern. The noise of battle increased, and he ran into the street. He found that somebody had taken his horse and tried to run down the street toward the creek. He was too late. A party of Hessians overtook him and obeyed Colonel von Donop's order, no quarter for rebels. The Hessians made it a game. They took his weapon, stole his money, plundered his watch, stripped off his clothing, and began to torment him with their bayonets. As the chaplain fell on his knees and began to pray, they killed him. Rosebrew's naked body was found in an open field with 13 bayonet wounds and many saber cuts to the head. British officers who hated the Black Regiment of the Presbyterian clergy celebrated his death. As the retreating Americans converged on the bridge, their formations came apart. The British light infantry caught the German-American brigade near the lower fords of the Assunpink. Most escaped across the stream, but some were taken and they were given quarter. Nearly all of the Americans got safely across the creek. Howland wrote that the bridge was narrow and our platoons in passing it were crowded into a dense and solid mass in the rear of which the enemy were making their best efforts. George Washington rode up and sat his horse quietly beside the bridge. Every man who crossed the bridge passed close by him. Private Howland wrote, "The noble horse of General Washington stood with his breast pressed close against the end of the west rail of the bridge, and the firm, composed, and majestic countenance of the general inspired confidence and assurance in a moment so important and critical. In this passage across the bridge, it was my fortune to be next the west rail. And arriving at the end of the bridge rail, I was pressed against the shoulder of the general's horse and in contact with the general's boot. The horse stood as firm as the rider and seemed to understand that he was not to quit his post and station." Whew, that's amazing. That is amazing. Not only was General Washington standing his post, but his horse was doing the same thing. And think about this. There's fighting, there's shooting, there's bayonets, there's all this stuff going on. His horse stood his ground. General Washington stood his ground. Again, the men spoke of his composure in a critical moment, and the infantry rallied to his quiet leadership. So think about that. He's a quiet leader. They saw his composure and they said, that's the general, that is the man. And he is inspiring us with his presence and his stoicism. And man, it gives me goosebumps just to think about it. Most privates in this little army were very near George Washington in the course of the battle. Many spoke with him. They felt that they were one with him and were inspired by his example. It was a complicated feeling that they had for him, not only trust and loyalty, but also confidence and complete approval. Now, I'm reading that because this is what is in that book by David Hackett Fisher, which I highly recommend reading. Continuing with that, I want to read what he talked about, what happened, what transpired next. Washington distributed his strength to cover the crossing places. The vital element in his defense was the American artillery. In the center, he put 18 or 19 guns, all to cover the bridge, some as close as 40 yards. Upstream, he put 12 guns behind the mill by the upper fords. Others were in position to cover the lower fords. He posted his most experienced Continental infantry at the three most critical points. On the American right, he placed Arthur St. Clair's New England Continentals, about 1,400 men. Most were at Phillips Mill, where the creek was most easily crossed. On the left, he posted Hitchcock's Rhode Island Continentals. Private Howland once again wrote, "When I was about halfway across the bridge, the general addressed himself to Colonel Hitchcock, the commander of the brigade, directing him to march his men to that field and form them immediately or instantly or as quick as possible. Which of the terms he used, I am not certain. At the same time, extending his arm and pointing to a little meadow at a short distance on the south side of the creek, between the road and the river. This order was promptly obeyed, and then we advanced to the edge of the stream facing the enemy. They took their positions in a little meadow between the roads and the Delaware, with prepared entrenchments by the lower fords. Okay, that's pretty inspirational, but then he continues. In the center, Washington sent his Virginia regiments to hold the bridge at the most important point. So he sent his men to the most important point, and one man remembered that as they were moving into place, General Washington came and in the presence of us all told Colonel Scott to defend the bridge to the last extremity. They were expecting to get overrun. Colonel Scott answered with a tremendous oath and repeated, "To the last man, Excellency." Phew! To the last man, Excellency, saying that to General George Washington as he stood there giving these orders, expecting to lose some of his mates from Virginia, knowing that Hitchcock's men and St. Clair's men were going to do the best that they possibly could with their artillery. Whew. So during defeat, General Washington is there with his men being strong, holding the line. So Washington held that line until at Assunpink Creek until dark. And Cornwallis had moved his men into battle positions. And I'm going to get excited. I'm going to get out of my notes here, but I want you to understand this is very motivating to me. One of the things that he did was he waited till it was dark. He left men behind, and I've got that in my notes, and I'll cover more of that. But he left behind about 500 men with shovels to make the sounds of building camp. They kept fires going. They were busy digging and keeping fires going, led Cornwallis to believe that they were digging in for the night, and in the morning, he was going to go in there and crush Washington. But in fact, what happened is the temperatures plummeted, which allowed George Washington to be able to get his cannons and all that artillery moved, as well as his men. They wrapped rags around the wheels of their wagons so that they could keep them quiet on the frozen dirt. And they moved out because they wanted to go and attack Princeton. So on 3 January, Brigadier General Hugh Mercer would attempt to fight through with his troops moving towards Princeton until he was overrun and killed. Brigadier General John Cadwallader attempted to help, but his men began to run. So now, here we are. We need these men to hold the line. We need them to do what they need to do, and they break and they run. They're inexperienced. They're not the greatest troops. They're good troops, but they just don't have the experience to know what their capabilities are. So they start to run. Who comes riding up? General George Washington. He rode forward and he rallied the militia troops that were running. And guess what they did? They turned and they fought. So at the worst possible moment, our leader, General Washington, steps up and he leads those men. Just because his subordinate commanders couldn't handle it, which they were great men as well, but they couldn't motivate like George Washington could. He stepped up there and rallied those men. So they turned and they fought. Later in that day, Princeton was taken from British hands by the American Army, and this broke the back for that winter of Cornwallis, and it motivated the troops of the entire U.S. military at the time. And because of that, we went into winter quarters, licked our wounds, and got ready for the next spring. And that was because in the time of defeat, we had a great leader, George Washington, that stepped up. So remember that, you as a leader, when it's time for you to step up, step up. Times are rough, that's what we need you even more. Times are terrible in our country. That's what some people say right now. I probably don't believe that, but we still need to stand with our families, with our communities, with those that we're leading, be a very positive influence at this rough time. Don't be somebody that's crying and screaming that we need to overthrow the government and all this. Stand and be a great leader. Right now, I'd say the most important thing is your family. Stand with them. So the second question that Mike Bell asked was, He said, second, you mentioned a leader needing individuals at the top and the shoulders to encourage and support a leader. I would really be interested if you touched on the importance of encouragement from those at peer level, but also individuals within the organization. That's a difficult question, Mike. So how can we support those other leaders who are in our command or in our business? Well, first of all, I would say the most important thing is to be honest. Too many times I see peers, and worse yet, leaders tell everybody, they're going to lie to their people. Oh, you're doing great. You're awesome. Wow, this is amazing. No, be honest with your people. If they're failing at something, tell them how they're failing. Sometimes it's difficult to critique folks, but as you do this more, it becomes easier and easier. Now, when you critique people, you're not trying to crush their spirit. You're trying to help them become better, no matter what that position happens to be, whether they're a subordinate leader or they're somebody that just works for you. We want to tell them what they need to do to become better. Do you believe that as you look to the left and right of the people that are around you, do you believe you have people that don't want to improve? You believe that we have people that don't want to become better leaders, better performers? I will challenge you that 99.9% of the people out there want to be better. So be honest with them. They deserve that honesty. So if you're trying to support those people on your left and your right, use honesty. It's going to hurt a little bit with some of those folks, and it might take a little bit of getting used to deal with honesty, but be honest. Your people deserve that. So that's the first thing. The second thing, learn valuable lessons from those people around you. See what their failures are and their successes and learn from that. Especially learn from their failures. Learn from your own failures as well. So have a hot wash and determine how you can be a better leader and apply that. I think that's important. As you do that, talk to those leaders on your left and your right and tell them how we can make our unit or our business better. Discuss this openly, because if you're truly a leader and on the team, you want everybody to be success. You want to raise everybody up together, not just yourself. If you feel like you want to just self-promote and raise your own biscuits out of the gravy, well then go ahead and do that. But I disagree with that totally. If you are successful, that's one thing. But what's more important is to make your people successful. If they're successful, that's going to raise everybody up. I just had a discussion on a phone call with my buddy John Zumwalt. He does the Zumwalt Zone, a radio show in North Carolina. We talked about one of my leaders, John Hale. And John's name keeps coming up in discussions because he was an amazing leader, and he's a guy that I look at with a ton of respect, and what he did as a leader to lift everybody up. When it was time for failure, John Hale was in the front and he said, I failed, I didn't have my guys trained good enough, or whatever the reasoning was, and he truly meant that. And then when we succeeded, he would push us to the front. He was always trying to inspire us to be better leaders and to help those on the left and the right. And he did that by how did he motivate us? He gave us additional responsibilities, and he let us try to do the right thing. If we failed, he was there to help us. But usually what happened was when he gave us those additional duties, we performed. Most of us, when we get extra duties, we're going to perform better. And then what he would say was, okay, now when you had that additional duty, you perform better. Always try to keep at that level of performance, whether you're leading or being led. Because I believe that one of the most important things about being a great leader is that you can also be led. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to read my notes here because I want to make sure I've got everything covered here. So learn valuable leadership lessons from those around you, as well as pass leadership lessons to others. You should want to make everybody a better leader or a better follower, so as to make your business or unit better. We always say we are all in this together, so really that's got to be true. The other thing is to be present for those around you. If you're a leader, be present to show those you lead that you care about what they're trying to accomplish, as well as what they're doing in their lives. And be honest. Be caring, but be honest with that. Don't put on a show. If you're condescending, they're going to know that. You got to be real, and you've got to get to bring those people to your level and talk to them about what they got going on. You're going to learn something there. If you can't be a good leader with good input to your people, maybe you should find another occupation. That's one of my notes, and I agree with that. Of course, I agree with that. I wrote the note, so that's a pretty strong statement. Find another occupation. Well, maybe that's what you need to do. If you're listening to this and you're saying, man, I don't think I can do any of this. Well, then maybe you should find another occupation. But I would challenge you that if this is bothering you, then fix it. Everybody here can fix that. If you say, well, I'm a great leader, I have nothing, there's nothing I can improve on, that's a bunch of BS. Hogwash, they'd say down here in the South. We can all be better. Every day. Every day I try to be better. I don't always succeed at that. I have a lot of failures too. But what happens? Those failures, we can transform those into successes by learning from those failures. I'll tell you right now, the thing I struggle with the most is my family. Being present and leading your family on a daily basis is hard. I've got a very strong wife. She is an amazing leader for our family. And every day I try to get up and maintain her standards that she has set for our family. It's difficult. If you saw the way I acted sometimes around my house, you'd probably feel embarrassed for me. And I feel embarrassed too. Man, my temper tantrums and my bad attitude sometime, oh my goodness, it is not good. But I'm learning from that. I pray about it and I'm like, Lord, I need some help on this one. I've got to be a better dad, a better husband, a better grandpa, a better leader of my family. So don't think that you have a struggle and you're alone. Don't think that you look around and think, well, everybody else is just, they're making this happen and they don't have any issues. No, they got issues. We all got issues. So from peer to peer, from leader to peer, from peer to leader, I'll tell you this, we're all in this together. Look at your left, look at your right. Give those people a reassuring pat on the butt, a pat, don't hold the butt, just a pat. Some of you watching this video, you might see what I did there, but you guys listening, you'll have to use your imagination. Give support to the people on your left and your right every day. Give support to your children, your wife, your husband. Support those people because it's important. It's very important, and they want that support. And it's going to help you in the long run too. Because as you support people, they're going to turn around and return that favor there. All right, so I'm going to read what I said, and this is basically what I said, I believe anyway. Family leaders. Lastly, I want to hit on family leadership. Be there for those kids and your spouse. I know your job is tough and important, but I'll break it to you gently. Your family is way more important than any job or promotion. Who's going to be there to change your diapers? Not your platoon sergeant or your CEO. It's going to be your family. We say that jokingly, but truthfully, your family is going to be there in the long run. I read that note, but obviously it's important to me. Fathers, dads, have I got your attention? Be present for your kids. What's more important than your children? Love your spouse, but be there for your children. What's going to be your legacy? Is it going to be that you were the CEO of some corporation? Is it going to be that you were a sergeant major in the Army and did whatever? You were a colonel, a general, a private first class, and you did all this spectacular stuff in Afghanistan or Iraq or Somalia or Korea, Vietnam, World War II. No, your legacy is going to be your family. So be there for your family. Once again, if we raise up our family, what's going to happen around us? We're all going to get raised together. if you raise your family up, it's going to also help you with how you work, how things go with you, whether you're in the military, law enforcement, or a civilian doing what you do at work. If you have a positive family structure, it's going to help with the support that you get. And other people are going to look to you and they're going to say, man, I want to be like this dude or this dudette. I want to be a great leader like they are with their family. And look, they can also handle what they're doing at work because they have a positive family experience. And that's important. Can't fire your family. They're your family. So you're stuck with them, right? So let's do the best that we possibly can with them. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but that's pretty much all I got for today. I've got one last thing that I want to read to you, but before I do that, I want to say I really appreciate your emails. Some of you folks that are out there that have sent us emails, I've got them sitting right here. I've got Terry, Luke, and Mike. I've got my homework to do. You sent me some serious emails here that require me to really digest this and come up with good answers for what you've asked and what your statements are. And some of these, I just want to regurgitate what you said because it's amazing. But to the rest of you, I would say, send us an email. If something's on your heart or on your mind, send us that email. One of these guys said, I'm a longtime listener, but I've never called in or written in. And if you got something to say it. We love to hear what you got to say. That doesn't mean I'm going to address everybody or respond to every email, but I really appreciate what you said. And it's not all positive. Some of you guys have kind of called me out, and I'm going to get to that because I love it. I absolutely love it. Mike from New York threw me under the bus. Mike, I'm definitely gonna talk about what you said because it's amazing. The stuff, and I say he threw me under the bus. He didn't, but he really inspired me to think, and that's what this is about. I want to inspire you guys to think about your leadership, think about your families, think about what you're reading, think about what you're doing every day, and that's what this is about. So, last but not least, send us an email to lamb, L-A-M-B, at vikingtactics.com, and we read every one of them. We may not respond, but we absolutely read every email that we get. We appreciate it. I'm going to close with this. C.S. Lewis in 1944, he wrote a book called The Abolition of Man. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. My buddy Sean Davis from The Federalist gave me this book to read, and it's really amazing. So in 1944, we think that in 2021, we've got difficulties. This is from 1944, and he's saying exactly what a lot of us are saying today. And this is a quote. This is the whole quote. Sometimes this quote gets cut short, but I'm going to read it all. So this is from C.S. Lewis in 1944. In a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. C.S. Lewis. Once again, in a sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ and demand the function. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings be fruitful. If I was you, I would look this up, study it, and understand that this was 1944. We could say it's 2021, and it applies to today. So they were struggling in 1944, and our country has made it to 2021. Pray for our country, pray for our troops, pray for law enforcement, pray for your families, and God bless America.